The sun-scorched dust lifted beneath Willa Turner's worn boots as she marched toward the foreman's office, clutching her pay voucher with white knuckles and determination burning in her eyes. 2 months of backbreaking work at the Double Creek Ranch, and not a single penny to show for it, except the growing dread of what Silas Blackwell would demand in exchange for what she'd rightfully earned. Fort Stanton, New Mexico Territory, 1878, was unforgiving to most, but particularly to a woman alone. "Mr. Blackwell," Willa called, pushing open the weathered door to the small office attached to the bunkhouse. "I've come for my wages." Silas Blackwell looked up from his ledger, thin lips curling into what he likely thought was a charming smile. To Willa, it resembled a coyote eyeing a wounded rabbit. "Miss Turner," he drawled, leaning back in his creaking chair. "Just the lady I've been hoping to see." Willa stood her ground, though her heart hammered against her ribs. At 22, she'd learned that showing fear only invited more trouble. "My pay, sir. 2 months' worth. I need it today." Blackwell rose slowly, circling the desk with deliberate steps. "Now, wages are a complicated matter for a woman in your position. Owner doesn't much like having a female hand, says you can't pull your weight." "That's not true, and you know it," Willa countered. "I've worked harder than half the men here." "Maybe so," he shrugged, now close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "But Mr. Hollister leaves these decisions to me, and I've been accommodating." His eyes traveled down her figure, lingering in places that made her skin crawl. "I think we could come to an arrangement that would benefit us both. Something more personal." Willa stepped back, her spine hitting the edge of the doorframe. "I want my wages, not an arrangement." Blackwell moved closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Don't be difficult, Willa. Pretty girl like you should know how things work out here. There are ways a woman can make life easier for herself." His hand reached for her waist, and Willa slapped it away. "Don't touch me." The foreman's face darkened. "Then don't expect to be paid. In fact, don't expect to have a job come morning either." His fingers gripped her arm. "Unless you reconsider my offer." The crunch of boots on the porch outside froze them both. "Everything all right in here?" The voice was deep, steady, and entirely unfamiliar to Willa. She turned to find a tall figure silhouetted against the late afternoon light. He stepped into the office, revealing a face weathered by sun and wind, with eyes sharp as a hawk's beneath the brim of his hat. "This is private business, stranger," Blackwell snarled, not releasing Willa's arm. "Doesn't look private to me," the man replied calmly. "Looks like you're manhandling a lady who'd rather you didn't. I'm the foreman here. This is ranch business." The stranger's gaze flickered to Willa, then to the hand gripping her arm. "Madam, is this man bothering you?" Before Willa could answer, Blackwell cut in. "She works for me. Now get out before I earned my wages fair and square," Willa blurted, finding her voice. "He's refusing to pay unless I provide favors." Something dangerous flashed in the stranger's eyes. He stepped forward, his posture casual yet somehow menacing. "That true, Foreman?" Blackwell released Willa's arm to face the intruder. "Like I said, stranger, this ain't your concern. I'm making it my concern." The stranger removed his hat, revealing dark hair with threads of copper where the sun had lightened it. "Name's Tucker Fallon. I've been looking for hands to hire for my place over in the Bonito Valley. Heard Double Creek might have some folks looking to move on." Willa stared at Tucker Fallon, measuring him. He stood relaxed, but she recognized the coiled readiness in his stance like a mountain lion before it pounces. "Well, you won't find any here," Blackwell spat. "Now I'd like to hear what the lady has to say," Tucker interrupted, his gaze never leaving Willa's face. Blackwell lunged forward, grabbing Tucker's shirt. "I said get out." What happened next was so swift Willa barely caught it. Tucker's arm moved in a blur, his fist connecting with Blackwell's jaw with a sickening crack. The foreman crumpled, hitting the floor in a heap. Tucker shook his hand once, then looked at Willa. "Madam, how much does he owe you?" Willa blinked, struggling to process the sudden turn of events. $40. 2 months at $20 each. Tucker nodded, stepping over Blackwell to reach the desk. He pulled open the drawer where she knew the cash box was kept, counted out 2 $20 gold pieces and handed them to her. "Consider it an advance," he said. "Work for me instead. Fair wages, paid on time, no strings attached." Willa stared at the gold coins in her palm, then at the man who'd just broken her foreman's jaw. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Tucker's expression softened slightly. "My ma raised me to believe that how a man treats those who can't fight back shows his true character." He glanced down at Blackwell, who was groaning and clutching his face. This one showed his. Blackwell struggled to his knees, blood trickling from his split lip, eyes blazing with hatred. "You'll regret this, Fallon. Hollister will have your hide." "Tell Hollister he should choose his foreman more carefully," Tucker replied evenly. "Men who prey on women aren't worth the bullet it would take to put them down." He turned back to Willa. "My offer stands, Miss Turner." "Willa Turner." "Miss Turner, my ranch needs good hands and I pay fair for honest work." Willa hesitated, weighing her options. She had nowhere to go, no family to fall back on. The $40 would last a while, but not forever. And there was something in Tucker Fallon's steady gaze that made her believe him. "When do we leave?" she asked. "Right now, if you're willing. I've got supplies to pick up in town, then we head out." Willa nodded. "I'll get my things." As she hurried to the small room behind the cookhouse where she'd been staying, Willa's mind raced. She was trusting a complete stranger based on a single act of decency. It could be foolishness, but her instincts told her Tucker Fallon was nothing like Silas Blackwell. She gathered her meager belongings, a change of clothes, a worn Bible that had been her mother's, a hairbrush, and the photograph of her parents taken just before the fever had claimed them 3 years ago. Everything fit into a single saddlebag. When she returned to the yard, Tucker was waiting with 2 horses, his own powerful buckskin gelding, and a bay mare that she recognized as one of Double Creek's better saddle horses. "That's Hollister's horse," she said, approaching cautiously. Tucker's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "Let's call it compensation for your trouble. Besides, you'll need a good mount for the ride to Bonito Valley." Willa hesitated. "Stealing a horse is hanging a fence, not stealing, trading." Tucker patted his gelding's neck. "I left my spare horse in the stable. Fair exchange." Blackwell had emerged from the office, supported by one of the ranch hands. His jaw was already swelling grotesquely. "You're both dead." He managed to slur through his injured mouth. "Hollister will hunt you down." Tucker swung into his saddle, unconcerned. "Miss Turner was paid her due wages, and I've left a perfectly good horse in exchange for this one. Nothing stolen here." He looked to Willa, waiting. She glanced around at the ranch that had been her home for 2 difficult months. No one moved to stop her. Most of the hands were watching from a distance, clearly unwilling to get involved. Decision made, Willa secured her saddlebag and mounted the bay mare. The horse danced sideways, sensing her tension, but settled quickly under her experienced hands. "Ready, Miss Turner?" Tucker asked. Willa nodded, and together they rode out of Double Creek Ranch, the curses of Silas Blackwell fading behind them. They rode in silence until the ranch disappeared from view, then Tucker slowed his pace to ride alongside her. "Fort Stanton's about an hour ahead. We'll get supplies there, spend the night if you prefer, and head out at first light." Willa studied him, this man who'd upended her life in the span of minutes. Tucker Fallon was tall and lean, with the hard muscle of someone who earned it through work rather than show. His face was all angles and planes, not classically handsome but striking, with deep-set eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Why did you really help me back there, Mr. Fallon?" Tucker considered her question, his expression thoughtful. "I've seen men like Blackwell before. They take what isn't offered, then make you feel like you owe them for the privilege." His jaw tightened. "No one deserves that, especially not someone just trying to earn an honest living. And your ranch, is that real or just something you said to intervene?" A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "The Diamondback is real enough, about 15 miles northeast of Fort Stanton in the valley. Not the biggest spread, but it's mine, free and clear. And you really need hands, always. Good help is hard to find in these parts." He glanced at her. "I meant what I said about fair wages. 25 a month, meals included. You'll have your own quarters small cabin that used to be a storehouse. It's not fancy, but it's private." Willa's eyes widened at the wage, $5 more than she'd been making at Double Creek. "That's generous." "It's fair for good work." He paused. "What brought you to ranch work, if you don't mind my asking? Not many women choose this life." Willa's hands tightened on the reins. "Necessity, Mr. Fallon. My parents died 3 years ago. Fever took them both within a week of each other. I was 19, with no relations to speak of. Our farm near Santa Fe was mortgaged to the hilt. The bank took everything. She'd worked as a laundress, then a cook's assistant, before landing the job at Double Creek. Ranch work was hard, but she preferred it to being confined indoors." "I'm sorry about your parents," Tucker said quietly. "Thank you." Willa straightened in her saddle. "But I don't want your pity, Mr. Fallon. I can pull my weight." Never doubted it for a moment. They rode on, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the trail. Fort Stanton came into view, just as the sun touched the western mountains. A collection of adobe and wooden buildings clustered around the old military fort that had given the settlement its name. Tucker led them to the general store, where he efficiently gathered supplies: flour, coffee, beans, bacon, ammunition, and a few other necessities. Willa added a small bag of hard candies to his purchases, then immediately felt foolish for the indulgence. Tucker merely nodded and added it to his order. "Sweet tooth?" he asked. Willa felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Sometimes." After loading their supplies, Tucker guided them to a small hotel on the town's main street. "They keep clean rooms here. You should get some rest." "We've got a full day's ride tomorrow." Willa hesitated. "I can pay for my own room." Tucker's eyes crinkled at the corners. "Never suggested otherwise, Miss Turner." Inside, the hotel keeper, a plump, graying woman named Mrs. Abernathy, eyed them with open curiosity. "2 rooms," Tucker said firmly, placing coins on the counter. When Willa moved to add her own money, he shook his head. "Company expense. You're not on my payroll until tomorrow." Mrs. Abernathy handed them each a key. "Dining room's closed, but there's stew keeping warm in the kitchen if you're hungry. Just help yourselves." The stew was hearty, filled with chunks of venison and potatoes. They ate in relative silence, both aware of the few other patrons casting curious glances their way. A woman traveling with a man who wasn't her husband or brother was bound to raise eyebrows. "We should clarify something, Miss Turner," Tucker said as they finished their meal. "At the Diamondback, you'll be treated with respect. You do your job, you get paid. Nothing more expected." Willa met his gaze directly. "I appreciate that, Mr. Fallon." "Tucker," he corrected. "If we're going to work together, might as well use first names." "Tucker," she repeated. "Then I'm Willa." He nodded, a smile touching his lips briefly. "Get some sleep, Willa. Dawn comes early." That night, lying in the narrow bed of her hotel room, Willa stared at the ceiling, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. Tucker Fallon seemed decent enough, but she'd been fooled before. The world wasn't kind to women alone. She'd learned that lesson repeatedly since her parents' deaths. Yet something told her to trust him. Perhaps it was the way he'd immediately handed her the wages she was owed, or how he'd made no move to touch her, keeping a respectful distance even as they rode side by side. Or maybe it was simply that in his eyes, she'd seen no hint of the hunger that had always lurked in Silas Blackwell's gaze. Whatever the reason, Willa decided to give Tucker Fallon a chance. 1 month. She'd work 1 month at the Diamondback Ranch, and if it wasn't what he'd promised, she'd take her wages and move on. With that resolution, she finally drifted into sleep. Dawn was just breaking when a knock at her door roused Willa. She dressed quickly in her work clothes, sturdy trousers, a loose cotton shirt, and the leather vest that had once belonged to her father. She braided her long dark hair and tucked it under her hat before opening the door. Tucker stood in the hallway, hat in hand. "Morning. There's breakfast downstairs when you're ready." Over plates of eggs, bacon, and biscuits, Tucker explained more about the Diamondback. "It's not a large operation. About 500 head of cattle, mostly Herefords. Good breeding stock. I've got 2 full-time hands brothers, Emmett and Calvin Ward. Decent men, hard workers. Emmett's wife, Sarah, does the cooking. They have a boy about 10 years old." "What will my duties be?" Willa asked, spreading jam on a biscuit. "Whatever needs doing," Tucker replied frankly. "Cattle work mostly, mending fences, checking the herds. Can you ride fence line?" Willa nodded. "I can ride, rope, and brand. I've helped with calving, doctored sick cattle. I can mend tack and shoot straight enough to scare off predators." Tucker looked impressed. "Where'd you learn all that?" "My father raised horses outside Santa Fe. Small operation, but I grew up working alongside him." "Good. That'll serve you well." Tucker drained his coffee cup. "One more thing, my ranch, my rules. No gunplay unless absolutely necessary, no fighting, and everyone pulls their weight." "Sounds reasonable." They finished breakfast and retrieved their horses from the livery. As they mounted up, Willa noticed a group of men gathered outside the saloon across the street. One of them pointed in their direction, speaking in low tones to his companions. Tucker noticed too. "Problem. Just wondering if word about Blackwell has spread already. Wouldn't be surprised. News travels fast in these parts." Tucker adjusted his hat. "Let's ride." They headed northeast from Fort Stanton, following the course of the Rio Benito. The terrain gradually changed from open grassland to rolling hills dotted with ponderosa pines. The air grew cooler as they climbed, carrying the scent of pine resin and sage. Tucker was a quiet traveling companion, speaking only occasionally to point out landmarks or share bits of information about the region. Willa didn't mind the silence. It gave her time to observe him, to try and take the measure of the man who had so abruptly changed the course of her life. What she saw reassured her. Tucker rode with the easy confidence of someone completely at home in the saddle. He checked their back trail regularly, a prudent habit in a land where danger could come from many quarters. Most telling was how he treated his horse with firm kindness and obvious care. By mid-afternoon they crested a rise and Tucker reined in his buckskin. There it is, Diamondback Ranch. Below them, a valley spread out, cradled by forested hills. A creek wound through the center, bordered by cottonwoods and willows. Fields of hay and alfalfa surrounded a cluster of buildings, a large main house built of squared logs, a barn, bunkhouse, and several smaller outbuildings. Cattle grazed in the distance, while closer to the buildings, horses moved about in a corral. "It's beautiful," Willa said honestly. Tucker nodded, something like pride softening his features. "Took me 10 years to build it up. started with nothing but 20 acres and a dozen head. As they rode down into the valley, a dog began barking, alerting the ranch to their approach. A man emerged from the barn, shading his eyes against the sun. "That's Emmett," Tucker said. Emmett Ward was a barrel-chested man with a thick beard and friendly eyes. He greeted Tucker with a nod, then looked curiously at Willa. "New hand?" he asked. "This is Willa Turner," Tucker replied. "She'll be working with us from now on." If Emmett was surprised by her gender, he hid it well. "Welcome to Diamondback, Miss Turner. My brother Cal is out checking the north pasture. He'll be back by supper." A woman appeared from the main house, wiping her hands on her apron. She was plump and pleasant-looking, with her brown hair pulled back in a simple bun. "Tucker Fallon, about time you got back," she called, then smiled at Willa. "And you've brought company. I'm Sarah Ward." Tucker dismounted, helping Willa down from her horse, though she didn't really need the assistance. "Sarah, this is Willa Turner, our newest hand." Sarah's eyebrows rose slightly, but her smile never faltered. "Well now, that's wonderful. We could use another woman around here. These men will work you to the bone, though, so don't let them get away with it." Tucker chuckled. "Show Willa to the cabin by the creek, would you? I told her she could use it." "Of course. You men see to the horses and unloading. Supper's in an hour." Sarah looped her arm through Willa's, leading her away from the men. "That cabin hasn't been lived in for a spell, but Tucker had the boys clean it up last week, almost like he knew he'd be bringing someone back." "You don't seem surprised that I'm a woman," Willa observed. Sarah laughed. "Honey, I've seen all sorts out here. Woman who can work is worth twice a man who can't in my book. Besides," she lowered her voice, "between us, this place could use a feminine touch beyond what I can manage." The cabin was small but solid, with a single room containing a narrow bed, a table with 2 chairs, a small cookstove, and a chest for storage. Simple muslin curtains framed the windows, and a colorful rag rug covered part of the plank floor. "It's perfect," Willa said, setting down her saddlebag. "There's fresh linens in the chest, and I put some dried lavender in there to keep it sweet-smelling." Sarah moved to the window, adjusting the curtain. "Privy's out back. For bathing, there's a washtub you can bring in, or the creek's private enough if you go around the bend yonder." Willa ran her hand over the smooth wooden surface of the table. "Thank you, Mrs. Ward." "Sarah, please. Mrs. Ward makes me sound like my mother-in-law." She smiled warmly. "Rest a bit, then come up to the house for supper. You can meet Calvin and our boy Thomas." Left alone, Willa unpacked her few possessions, placing her parents' photograph on the small shelf above the bed. She splashed water on her face from the basin by the window, then sat on the edge of the bed, taking in her new home. It was modest, but far better than she'd had at Double Creek, where she'd slept in a partitioned corner of the cookhouse. Here, she had privacy, a door she could close, windows that looked out on trees instead of dusty corrals. And for the first time in years, she had a sense of possibility that this might be more than just another temporary stop in a life of constant movement. Supper at the main house was a lively affair. Calvin Ward proved to be as friendly as his brother, though quieter and more reserved. Young Thomas peppered Willa with questions about her life before Diamondback, his curiosity unfettered by adult restraint. "Did you really work at Double Creek? I heard the foreman there is meaner than a wounded bear," the boy said between mouthfuls of Sarah's excellent beef stew. "Thomas," Sarah admonished, "that's not polite conversation for the table." Tucker, seated at the head of the long pine table, caught Willa's eye with a questioning look, silently asking if she wanted to address the boy's comment or let it pass. "It's all right," Willa said. "Yes, Thomas, I did work at Double Creek, and yes, the foreman there was difficult to work for." "Is that why Mr. Fallon brought you here instead?" Thomas persisted. This time it was Emmett who intervened. "Son, sometimes adults make decisions that aren't for young ears. Miss Turner is here now, and we're glad to have her." Willa shot him a grateful look, and the conversation turned to ranch matters, fences that needed mending, a mountain lion that had been spotted near the north pasture, plans for the upcoming cattle drive to Santa Fe in the fall. After supper, Tucker walked Willa back to her cabin. The evening was cool, with stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "The Wards seem like good people," Willa remarked. "The best," Tucker agreed. "Been with me almost from the beginning. Emmett helped me build this place when it was nothing but a shack and a lean-to for the horses." They reached her cabin, and Tucker stopped a respectful distance from the door. "You'll start tomorrow. Emmett will show you around, get you familiar with our operation. Any questions before then?" Willa hesitated, then decided directness was best. "Just one. Are you worried about trouble from Blackwell or Hollister?" Tucker's expression grew serious. "I'm not worried, but I am prepared. Hollister's got influence, but so do I. And unlike Blackwell, I don't make a habit of forcing myself on women." "I never thanked you properly," Willa said quietly, "for what you did." Tucker shook his head. "No need. Anyone worth their salt would have done the same. But they didn't. You did." She met his gaze steadily. "So thank you, Tucker Fallon." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or something warmer. "You're welcome, Willa Turner." He touched the brim of his hat. "Sleep well. Dawn comes early on a ranch." Willa watched him walk away, his tall figure silhouetted against the last light of day. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something like hope taking root in her heart. The next few weeks passed in a blur of hard work and new routines. True to Tucker's word, Willa was treated as an equal on the Diamondback. She rode fence lines, helped move cattle from one pasture to another, assisted in branding the late spring calves, and took her turn at night watch when predators threatened the herds. The work was exhausting but satisfying. Each night, she fell into bed pleasantly tired, her muscles aching from honest labor. Each morning, she rose with the dawn, eager to prove her worth. The Wards accepted her presence without question. Emmett treated her with the same gruff respect he showed to Calvin, while Sarah clearly delighted in having another woman to talk to. Young Thomas followed Willa around whenever she was near the main house, peppering her with questions and offering to help with her chores. And then there was Tucker. He was a fair employer, never asking more of her than he would of any hand, but also never treating her with kid gloves because of her gender. He worked alongside his people, getting his hands dirty, leading by example rather than command. Willa found herself studying him when he wasn't looking. The way the sun brought out auburn highlights in his dark hair, how his face transformed when he smiled, a rare but rewarding sight. The quiet competence in his hands as he worked with horses or cattle. It wasn't just his appearance that drew her attention, though she had to admit he was handsome in a rugged, unpolished way. It was his character, his integrity, his fairness, the respect he showed to everyone from young Thomas to old Sam Lightfoot, the Mescalero Apache who occasionally brought game to trade at the ranch. One evening in late June, Willa was returning from checking the cattle in the south pasture when she spotted Tucker by the corral, working with a young colt. She reined in her mare, watching as he patiently guided the nervous animal around the enclosure, his movements calm and deliberate. Tucker looked up, noticing her presence. "Everything all right in the south pasture, all quiet," she replied, dismounting. "That's the colt from the Morgan mare," Tucker nodded, giving the young horse's neck an affectionate pat. "He's coming along, got good bones, good temperament. Just needs time and patience." Willa leaned against the corral fence. Like most worthwhile things, Tucker's eyes met hers, and something unspoken passed between them. He opened his mouth as if to say more, then paused as Calvin rode in from the direction of Fort Stanton, pushing his horse harder than usual. "Tucker," Calvin called, reining in sharply. "Trouble coming." Tucker immediately released the colt and moved to the fence. "What kind?" "Riders from Double Creek, 6 of them, led by Hollister himself. They were asking about you in town." Calvin dismounted, his expression grim. "They know she's here." He nodded toward Willa. Tucker's jaw tightened. "How far behind you?" "Hour, maybe less." "They stopped at the saloon, but they won't stay long." Tucker turned to Willa. "This is your fight as much as mine. What do you want to do?" Willa straightened her shoulders. "I won't run. I didn't steal anything, and neither did you." Tucker nodded as if he'd expected nothing less. "Calvin, get Emmett. Tell Sarah to take Thomas to the back pasture cabin just in case." As Calvin hurried to comply, Tucker faced Willa again. "You know how to use that?" He nodded toward the rifle in her saddle scabbard. "Yes," she said simply. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." His voice softened. "Willa, you've earned your place here. Whatever happens, remember that." Before she could respond, he was striding toward the main house, his posture alert but not alarmed. Willa unsaddled her mare and brushed her down quickly, her mind racing. She wasn't surprised that Hollister had come looking for them. Men like him didn't take kindly to having their authority challenged, especially not by a woman and a stranger who'd broken their foreman's jaw. By the time she joined the others on the porch of the main house, the distant sound of approaching horses could be heard. Tucker stood at the center, with Emmett and Calvin flanking him. All 3 men were armed, though their weapons remained holstered. "Stay behind me," Tucker said to Willa as she approached. She moved to his side instead. "This involves me too." Their eyes met briefly, and Tucker gave a slight nod of acknowledgement. The riders came into view, 6 men on dusty horses. At their head was Douglas Hollister, owner of the Double Creek Ranch, a heavy-set man in his 50s with a florid face partially hidden beneath a bushy gray beard. Beside him rode Silas Blackwell, his jaw still visibly swollen, his eyes burning with malice when they landed on Willa. The riders pulled up about 20 yards from the house. Hollister surveyed the Diamondback buildings with obvious disdain before focusing on Tucker. "Fallon," he called, "you've got something that belongs to me." Tucker stepped forward. "If you mean the bay mare, I left a fair trade in your stable. A roan gelding worth more than the bay." "Not the horse," Hollister growled. "The girl and the $40 you stole." "I stole nothing," Tucker replied evenly. "Miss Turner was owed wages that your foreman refused to pay unless she provided additional services." Hollister glanced at Blackwell, whose face darkened with anger. "Silas says different. Says she tried to seduce him for extra money, then stole from the cash box when he refused." Willa felt her face flush with indignation. "That's a lie. The lady's right," Tucker said, his voice remaining calm despite the tension in his posture. "Your foreman is lying to save face. He attempted to force himself on Miss Turner in exchange for wages she'd already earned." "I merely ensured she received what was rightfully hers." "By breaking my jaw," Blackwell snarled. "By giving you what was rightfully yours," Tucker replied coldly. Hollister dismounted, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. "I don't much care what happened between Silas and the girl. What I care about is a man coming onto my property, assaulting my foreman and riding off with my property." "Mr. Hollister," Willa said, stepping forward despite Tucker's warning glance. "I worked 2 months at Double Creek. I was never paid a single dollar. When I asked for my wages, Mr. Blackwell demanded personal favors in return." Hollister looked at her with open contempt. "A woman doing man's work ain't natural to begin with. Wouldn't surprise me if you offered Silas more than just ranch work." The insult hung in the air like smoke. Emmett and Calvin shifted their positions slightly, hands moving closer to their weapons. Tucker remained still, but Willa could sense the fury building within him. "Apologize to the lady," Tucker said, his voice dangerously soft. Hollister laughed. "Or what? You'll break my jaw too." He spat on the ground. "You're outnumbered, Fallon. I want my money, my horse, and I want this thieving woman to face consequences." Tucker's hand moved so fast Willa barely saw it. Suddenly his revolver was drawn, the barrel aimed steadily at Hollister's chest. The Double Creek men reached for their weapons, but Emmett and Calvin already had them covered. "Nobody needs to die today, Hollister," Tucker said calmly. "Here's what's going to happen. You and your men are going to turn around and ride out. Miss Turner stays here where she's employed fairly and treated with respect. The $40 she took was rightfully earned. The horse was traded fairly." Hollister's face had gone pale, but his eyes blazed with hatred. "This isn't over, Fallon." "It can be," Tucker replied. "Or it can get a lot worse. Your choice." For a tense moment, Willa thought Hollister might choose violence. Then slowly he backed toward his horse. "Mount up, boys. We're leaving." As they prepared to ride out, Blackwell locked eyes with Willa. "Watch your back, girl," he called. "Accidents happen out here all the time." Tucker took a step forward, his gun still raised. "That sounded like a threat, Blackwell. I don't take kindly to threats against my people." Blackwell sneered but said nothing more as Hollister gave the order to ride out. The 6 men departed in a cloud of dust, heading back toward Fort Stanton. No one on the porch relaxed until the riders were well out of sight. Finally, Tucker holstered his weapon and turned to the others. "Emmett, double the night watch for the next few weeks. Calvin, ride out to the line cabins. Make sure the hands know to keep their eyes open for trouble." The brothers nodded and moved off to carry out their tasks. Tucker turned to Willa, his expression softening with concern. "Are you all right?" Willa nodded, though her heart was still racing from the confrontation. "I'm fine. But Hollister won't let this go, will he?" Tucker ran a hand through his hair. "Probably not. Men like him can't stand being defied." He studied her face. "If you want to move on, I'd understand. This wasn't your fight to begin with." "It became my fight when Blackwell tried to use my body as currency," Willa said firmly. "I won't be driven away by bullies." Something flickered in Tucker's eyes, pride, perhaps, or admiration. "Good. Because I'd hate to lose my best hand just when she's getting settled in." Despite the lingering tension, Willa felt a smile tug at her lips. "Best hand? I've only been here 3 weeks. Quality shows itself quickly," Tucker replied, the corner of his mouth lifting in a half-smile. Their gazes held for a moment longer than necessary before Tucker cleared his throat. "I should check on the south pasture. Hollister might have sent men around the back way." As he strode toward the stables, Willa watched him go, a strange warmth spreading through her chest despite the day's troubles. For better or worse, her fate was now tied to Tucker Fallon's. The realization should have frightened her, but instead, it felt oddly right. Life at the Diamondback settled back into its routine in the days following Hollister's visit, though with added precautions. No one rode out alone, and the rifle that normally hung above Willa's door now accompanied her everywhere. July brought scorching heat and afternoon thunderstorms that rolled across the valley with dramatic displays of lightning. The grass grew lush from the rain, and the cattle grew fat, promising a good price at the fall markets if they could avoid the usual hazards: disease, predators, and cattle thieves. Willa found herself working closely with Tucker as they prepared for the upcoming drive to Santa Fe. Together they rode the boundaries of the ranch, checking water holes and assessing the condition of the herd. During these long days in the saddle, Willa learned more about the man who had so abruptly changed the course of her life. Tucker had come to New Mexico territory from Texas after the war, where he'd fought for the Union despite his Southern upbringing. He'd worked as a cowhand, a horse breaker, even briefly as a deputy marshal before saving enough to buy his first piece of land. "I wanted something that was mine," he told her as they rested their horses beneath a grove of cottonwoods one blazing afternoon. "Something I built with my own hands that no one could take away." Willa understood that desire all too well. "My father was the same way about our horse farm. He used to say that land is the only thing that lasts." Tucker nodded, passing her the canteen. "Smart man." "He would have liked you," Willa said without thinking, then felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the summer sun. Tucker's eyes met hers, something unreadable in their depths. "I hope so," he said quietly. The moment stretched between them, filled with words unsaid. Then a distant roll of thunder broke the spell, and they were back in their saddles, hurrying to complete their circuit before the storm hit. That evening, as rain lashed against the windows of her cabin, Willa found herself thinking about Tucker Fallon with a frequency that was becoming habit. In the weeks since she'd arrived at Diamondback, her feelings toward him had evolved from cautious gratitude to genuine respect. And now, something more. She wasn't naive. At 22, she'd had suitors before the son of a neighboring farmer back in Santa Fe, a young deputy in a town where she'd worked briefly as a laundress. But neither had stirred in her the complex emotions that Tucker awakened. It wasn't just his physical appearance, though she admitted to herself that she found his tall, lean frame and weather-roughened features appealing. It was the integrity that seemed to radiate from him, the quiet strength that demanded nothing yet offered protection without expectation. A knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. Willa grabbed her rifle and moved cautiously to the window, relaxing when she saw Tucker standing on her small porch, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. She opened the door. "Tucker, is everything all right?" "Fine," he assured her quickly. "Just wanted to check that your roof's holding up. This cabin's the oldest on the property." Willa stepped back, gesturing for him to enter. "Come in before you drown." Tucker hesitated, then stepped inside, removing his hat and slicker. Water pooled around his boots on the plank floor. "Sorry about that," he said, glancing down. "It's just water." Willa moved to the small stove where she kept a pot of coffee warm. "Would you like some?" Tucker nodded, and she poured 2 cups, handing one to him. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, sending an unexpected jolt through her. "How are you settling in?" Tucker asked, cradling the cup in his large hands. "Honestly," Willa considered the question, "better than I expected. The work is hard but satisfying. The wards have been kind, and—" She paused, gathering her courage. "You've been more than fair." Tucker's gaze was steady over the rim of his cup. "You've earned your place here, Willa. Everyone says so. Even with the trouble I brought with me. Hollister's trouble was coming whether you were here or not. He's had his eye on Diamondback for years, wants to expand his range." Willa hadn't known this, so helping me gave him an excuse. Tucker shrugged. "Maybe, but I'd do it again in a heartbeat." The simple declaration warmed her more than the coffee. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, listening to the rain drum against the roof. "No leaks," Tucker noted, glancing upward. "None," Willa confirmed. Then, impulsively, "Why did you really come check on me tonight, Tucker?" His eyes returned to hers, surprise flickering briefly across his features. Then, with characteristic honesty, he answered, "Because I wanted to see you." The admission hung in the air between them. Willa's heart beat faster as she took a step closer to him. "I'm glad you did." Tucker set down his coffee cup, his expression serious. "Willa, I don't want you to think. That is, I'd never expect." He took a deep breath. "What Blackwell tried to do to you is nothing like this," she interrupted softly. "I know the difference between coercion and choice, Tucker." He studied her face as if searching for any sign of doubt. "You work for me. That complicates things. Only if we let it." Willa took another step closer. "I've always believed that intentions matter. Yours have been honorable from the start." Tucker's gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. "And if my intentions are changing," he asked, his voice rougher than before. "Then we'd have that in common," Willa whispered. For a moment, neither moved. Then, slowly, Tucker raised his hand to her cheek, his calloused palm warm against her skin. Willa leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. When their lips finally met, it was gentle, tentative, even. Tucker kissed her as if she were something precious, something that might break or disappear if handled too roughly. Willa reached up, her hands finding his shoulders, drawing him closer. The kiss deepened, growing more confident as they both silently acknowledged what had been building between them for weeks. Tucker's arms encircled her waist, and Willa felt as though she'd found something she hadn't known she was missing. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Tucker rested his forehead against hers. "I didn't plan for this to happen," he murmured. Willa smiled, her hands still on his shoulders. "Neither did I, but I'm not sorry it did. Nor am I." Tucker brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch reverent. "But I want to do this right, Willa. You deserve that." She understood what he meant. In this territory, reputations were fragile things, especially for women. What had just happened between them could easily be misconstrued if made public too soon. "I'm not in a hurry, Tucker," she said. "We have time." He nodded, visibly relieved that she understood. Reluctantly, he stepped back, though his eyes remained fixed on her face. "I should go. It's late." Willa walked him to the door. Before stepping out into the rain, Tucker turned back, capturing her lips in one more brief, tender kiss. "Good night, Willa," he said softly. "Good night, Tucker." As she watched him disappear into the rainy darkness, Willa felt a sense of certainty settle over her. Whatever came next, whether further trouble from Hollister or the natural challenges of ranch life, she would face it with Tucker Fallon at her side. The thought filled her with a happiness she hadn't dared hope for since losing her parents. August brought even more intense heat, but also a growing closeness between Willa and Tucker. They were careful to maintain professionalism during working hours, but in the evenings, they often found moments to be alone together, walks along the creek, quiet conversations on the porch of her cabin, or rides to the high pastures where the view stretched for miles. Tucker courted her properly, with a respect and tenderness that healed wounds Willa hadn't realized she still carried. He never presumed, never pushed, and always treated her as an equal. By unspoken agreement, they kept their developing relationship private, though Willa suspected Sarah Ward had guessed the truth from the knowing smiles she sometimes cast their way. The threat from Double Creek seemed to have receded. There had been no further confrontations, no suspicious strangers lurking near Diamondback's boundaries. Tucker maintained the extra security measures, but admitted that perhaps Hollister had decided the feud wasn't worth pursuing. "Or he's waiting for a better opportunity," Emmett suggested one evening as they discussed the upcoming cattle drive over supper. Tucker nodded grimly. "That's more likely. Hollister's not known for forgetting grudges." "The drive to Santa Fe starts in 2 weeks," Calvin pointed out. "That's when we'll be most vulnerable." Willa looked up from her plate. "You think he might try something during the drive?" "It's possible," Tucker acknowledged. "Cattle on the move are easier to scatter or steal. And with most of us gone from the ranch, Diamondback itself would be more vulnerable." "I'll stay behind," Emmett offered. "Sarah and Thomas would be here anyway. Calvin can go with you." Tucker considered this, then shook his head. We need you both on the drive. I'll hire extra hands to guard the ranch while we're gone. What about me? Willa asked. Am I going on the drive or staying here? The men exchanged glances, and Willa felt a flicker of irritation. I'm perfectly capable of driving cattle, she said firmly. Tucker's expression softened. No one's doubting your ability, Willa, but the trail to Santa Fe can be dangerous even without the threat from Hollister, and if he is planning something, all the more reason to have every capable hand on the drive, she countered. I'm a good shot, I can ride as well as any of you, and I know cattle. You need me out there. Tucker studied her for a long moment, then nodded. You're right, you'll come with us. The decision made, they turned to the practicalities of preparing for the drive. 300 head would make the journey to Santa Fe, where Tucker had arranged a sale to the Army for a good price. The remaining cattle would stay behind to maintain the breeding stock. The next 2 weeks were a flurry of activity. Cattle had to be selected and gathered, supplies prepared, horses chosen for the journey. Tucker hired 4 experienced drovers to supplement their regular crew, plus 2 extra hands to stay behind with Sarah Thomas and the remaining stock. The night before the drive was to begin, Willa sat on the porch of her cabin, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The air was cooling as summer began its gradual transition to fall, carrying the scent of pine from the surrounding hills. Tucker's footsteps on the path alerted her to his approach before she saw him. He moved quietly for such a large man, a skill developed from years of working with skittish livestock. Mind if I join you? He asked, pausing at the foot of the steps. Willa smiled, patting the space beside her on the bench. I was hoping you would. Tucker settled next to her, close enough that their shoulders touched. For a while they simply sat in comfortable silence, watching as more stars appeared above. Nervous about tomorrow? Tucker finally asked. Willa considered the question. A little, she admitted. I've never been on a drive before, but I'm more excited than nervous. Tucker nodded, understanding. First time I went on a drive, I was 16, scared to death but trying not to show it. He smiled at the memory. By the end, I knew it was what I wanted to do with my life. How many drives have you led as trail boss? This will be my 11th for Diamondback. Did a few for other outfits before that. Willa turned to study his profile in the dim light. You've built something remarkable here, Tucker. He glanced at her, his expression softening. It's been lonely work at times. The simple admission touched her deeply. Tucker Fallon wasn't a man who easily revealed vulnerability. That he would do so with her felt like a gift, a sign of trust that meant more than grand declarations. Not anymore, she said softly, reaching for his hand. Tucker's fingers interlaced with hers, warm and strong. Willa, he began, his voice low and serious. There's something I need to say before tomorrow. She waited, heart quickening at his tone. Tucker turned to face her fully. When I met you at Double Creek, I had no idea how much you'd come to mean to me. These past months, getting to know you, working alongside you, it's changed everything. Willa squeezed his hand encouragingly. I'm not a man of fancy words, Tucker continued. But I know my own mind and my own heart. His free hand reached up to gently touch her cheek. I love you, Willa Turner. Whatever happens on this drive or after, that's the truth of it. Joy bloomed within her, bright and warm. I love you too, Tucker. I think I have since that first day, when you stood up for me when no one else would. Tucker's smile transformed his face, erasing the lines of worry that had been there moments before. He leaned forward, capturing her lips in a kiss that spoke volumes, tender yet passionate, a promise of things to come. When they parted, Tucker kept her close, his forehead resting against hers. When we get back from Santa Fe, he said quietly, I want to do this properly, if you'll have me. Willa's heart soared at his meaning. Are you asking what I think you're asking, Tucker Fallon, his eyes crinkled at the corners? Depends on your answer. Yes, she said without hesitation. My answer is yes. Tucker kissed her again, pulling her closer. This kiss was deeper, filled with the promise of their future together. When they finally separated, both a little breathless, Tucker stood reluctantly. I should go. Dawn comes early and we've got a long day ahead. Willa nodded, though she was tempted to ask him to stay. But they had agreed to take things slowly to honor the traditions they both respected. I'll see you at dawn, she said, walking with him to the steps. Tucker kissed her once more, briefly but with feeling. Sleep well, Willa. You too. As she watched him walk back toward the main house, Willa felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. Whatever challenges lay ahead on the trail to Santa Fe, she would face them with courage, knowing that Tucker Fallon loved her. Dawn broke clear and cool, the eastern sky ablaze with streaks of orange and gold. The ranch yard was a hive of activity as the drovers made final preparations for the journey. Horses were saddled, bedrolls secured, supplies loaded onto the chuck wagon that Calvin would drive. Willa, dressed in her sturdiest clothes with a bandana tied around her neck to keep out the dust, led her bay mare from the stable. The horse was well rested and eager, sensing the excitement in the air. Tucker was already mounted on his buckskin, giving final instructions to the hands who would remain behind. When he saw Willa, he touched the brim of his hat in greeting, his eyes conveying what he couldn't say in front of the others. Ready? He asked as she swung into the saddle. Willa nodded, settling her hat more firmly on her head. Ready. Tucker gave the signal and the drive began. The cattle, already gathered in the south pasture, were urged forward by the drovers positioned around the herd. Dust rose as hundreds of hooves stirred the earth, and the air filled with the sounds of lowing cattle and shouted commands. Willa took her position on the left flank of the herd, keeping the animals moving in the right direction. The work was dusty and demanding, but she found a rhythm to it, working in concert with the other drovers to keep the cattle from straying. Tucker rode back and forth along the column, overseeing the operation with experienced eyes. Occasionally, he would ride alongside Willa, checking on her but never hovering, treating her as he would any other hand. By midday, they had settled into the steady pace that would characterize the drive, about 15 miles per day, allowing the cattle to graze along the way to maintain their weight and value. When they stopped for the noon meal, Willa dismounted, stretching muscles already sore from hours in the saddle. Tucker approached, offering her a canteen. "How are you holding up?" he asked quietly. She took a long drink before answering. "Well enough. It's hard work, but I expected that." Tucker's eyes crinkled with approval. "You're doing fine. Better than fine, actually. Some of the men have noticed." Willa raised an eyebrow. "Noticed what?" "That you're not asking for any special treatment, for one, and that you handle that mare like you were born in the saddle." Pride warmed her at his words. "My father taught me to ride before I could walk." They ate quickly jerky, biscuits, and coffee from the chuck wagon before returning to their positions. The afternoon stretched long and hot, the sun beating down mercilessly as they guided the herd through a narrow valley and toward the first planned night camp. As dusk approached, they reached a creek where the cattle could drink. The animals were settled for the night, with drovers taking turns on watch to prevent strays or stampedes. Around the campfire that evening, Willa felt the curious gazes of the hired hands men who had worked cattle drives before, but clearly hadn't expected to ride with a woman. Most were respectfully distant, though one, a weathered drover named Haskell, seemed to watch her with particular interest. "You handled yourself well today, Miss Turner," he commented as she accepted a plate of beans and salt pork from Calvin. "Thank you, Mr. Haskell." she replied politely. Ain't many women who'd take on a cattle drive, he continued. Especially not with the likes of Hollister holding a grudge. Willa paused, her spoon halfway to her mouth. What do you know about Hollister? Haskell shrugged, glancing toward Tucker, who had gone still at the mention of the name. Just trail talk. Heard there was bad blood between Diamondback and Double Creek, something about a woman and a broken jaw. The other drovers were listening now, their conversation dying away. Tucker set down his plate, his expression unreadable in the flickering firelight. There was a disagreement, he said evenly. It's been settled. Haskell looked unconvinced. That ain't what I heard in Fort Stanton. Word is Hollister's been hiring gun hands, extra protection for his ranch, he says. A tense silence fell over the camp. Finally, Emmett spoke. You think he's planning something during the drive? Haskell scratched his stubbled chin. Can't say for certain, but a smart trail boss might want to keep his eyes open, especially once we cross into Double Creek Range tomorrow. Tucker nodded, his expression grim. We'll post extra watches tonight, 2 men at a time, rotating every 2 hours. He looked around the circle. Emmett, you and I will take first watch. Haskell and Jenkins second. Calvin and Miller third. Willa and Cooper will take the dawn shift. The men nodded their agreement, and the conversation gradually returned to normal topics past drives, the price of beef in Santa Fe, tales of stampedes and river crossings. But an undercurrent of tension remained. Later, as the others settled into their bedrolls, Willa approached Tucker as he prepared for the first watch. You believe what Haskell said about Hollister? She asked quietly. Tucker checked his rifle before answering. I believe Hollister's not the type to let go of a grudge. Whether he'll act on it remains to be seen. Willa nodded, understanding his caution. Be careful out there. His expression softened as he glanced around to ensure they weren't observed, then briefly touched her cheek. Always, Em, get some rest. Your watch comes early. Willa settled into her bedroll, pulling the blanket up against the night chill. Despite her exhaustion from the day's work, sleep came fitfully as she listened to the night sounds, cattle shifting restlessly, the distant cry of a coyote, the soft footfalls of the men on watch. When Cooper shook her awake for the dawn shift, the eastern sky was just beginning to lighten. Willa rose quickly, checking her rifle before mounting her mare. The pre-dawn air was crisp, carrying the scent of sage and dew-dampened earth. She rode the perimeter of the herd, keeping a watchful eye for any signs of trouble. The cattle were beginning to stir, some already on their feet in anticipation of the day's journey. In the growing light, Willa could see Tucker emerging from his bedroll, his tall figure unmistakable even at a distance. The second day of the drive began much like the first, with the cattle moving steadily along the trail toward Santa Fe. By mid-morning, however, they had reached the boundary of Double Creek Range, marked by a change in the terrain as the trail descended into a broad valley cut by a shallow river. Tucker called a halt before the crossing, riding back to confer with Emmett and Calvin. Willa guided her mare closer, aware that decisions were being made that would affect them all. We'll cross here, Tucker was saying, pointing to a wider section of the river. The cattle will have an easier time and we'll have better visibility on both banks. Emmett nodded in agreement. What about scouts? Should we send someone ahead? Tucker considered this. Yes. Haskell, you and Jenkins ride ahead, check the route for the next 5 miles. Report back immediately if you see anything suspicious. The 2 men nodded and spurred their horses forward, crossing the river and disappearing into the rolling terrain beyond. The crossing itself went smoothly, with the cattle moving through the shallow water with minimal guidance. Once on the other side, they continued along the trail, now clearly within Double Creek territory. The mood among the drovers was noticeably tenser, with each man scanning the surroundings as they rode. Willa kept her position on the left flank, her rifle within easy reach across her saddle. She noticed Tucker riding more frequently along the edges of the herd, his vigilance obvious in the set of his shoulders. It was nearing midday when Haskell and Jenkins returned, riding hard. Tucker moved to intercept them, and Willa angled her horse closer to hear their report. "Riders ahead," Haskell said without preamble. "About a dozen, positioned near the narrowest part of the trail where it passes between those two bluffs." He gestured to a point about 2 miles ahead, where the trail was indeed constricted between rocky outcroppings. "Hollister's men?" Tucker asked. Jenkins nodded, saw Blackwell among them. "They've set up what looks like a toll station, got a barrier across the trail." Tucker's jaw tightened. "So that's their game, force us to pay for crossing their land or turn back." "Either way they win," Emmett growled. "We can't afford to lose time backtracking, and they know it." Willa guided her horse alongside Tucker's. "Is there another route we could take? Go around Double Creek entirely?" Tucker shook his head. "Not without adding days to the journey. Time we don't have if we want to make the delivery date in Santa Fe." They fell silent, considering the options. Finally, Tucker spoke. "We'll keep moving forward, but slowly. Emmett, send word down the line for everyone to be ready. If Hollister wants trouble, we won't start it, but we'll finish it if necessary." As they approached the narrow pass, Willa could see the barrier Haskell had described, a makeshift gate constructed of fence rails, blocking the trail completely. Behind it stood a group of mounted men, with Silas Blackwell prominently positioned at the center. Hollister himself was there as well, his portly figure unmistakable even at a distance. Tucker signaled for the drive to halt about 50 yards from the barrier. He rode forward alone, his posture relaxed but alert. Willa watched anxiously as he approached Hollister and his men. Though she couldn't hear the exchange, the body language told her enough. Hollister was gesturing expansively, while Tucker remained still in his saddle. After several minutes, Tucker turned his horse and rode back to where the others waited. "Hollister claims we're trespassing on Double Creek land," he reported, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Says we can pass if we pay a fee of $5 per head of cattle." Emmett swore under his breath. "That's robbery. The whole drive wouldn't be worth it after a toll like that." "Exactly what he's counting on," Tucker agreed. "He wants me to fail on this contract. Without the Army money, Diamondback would be vulnerable." "What do we do?" Calvin asked. Tucker's eyes narrowed as he studied the barrier and the men guarding it. "We negotiate. I'll offer a reasonable payment for crossing rights, say $50 total. If he refuses, we'll have to consider alternatives." "And if he accepts?" Willa asked, knowing how unlikely that scenario was. "Then we pay and move on," Tucker said simply. "But I don't think he will." He was right. When Tucker rode forward again to present his counteroffer, Hollister's laughter could be heard even where Willa waited with the others. The Double Creek owner said something to Blackwell, who grinned maliciously in response. Tucker returned, his expression grim. As expected, he refused, says it's his price or nothing. "So what now?" Haskell asked, voicing what everyone was thinking. Tucker surveyed the land around them, his experienced eyes taking in the terrain. "There," he said, pointing to a rocky slope that rose to the east of the trail. "That ridge runs parallel to the trail. If we can get the herd up there, we might be able to bypass the barrier entirely." Emmett looked doubtful. "That's steep country. Cattle could be injured or worse." "It's a risk," Tucker acknowledged, "but less of one than losing the entire drive." The decision made, Tucker gave instructions for how they would proceed. The herd would be gradually turned eastward, away from the trail and toward the slope. The most experienced drovers would guide the lead steers, while the others kept the rest of the herd following. It would be slow, painstaking work, especially with Hollister's men watching their every move. "What about them?" Willa nodded toward the barrier where Hollister and his men remained. "They'll figure out what we're doing soon enough," Tucker said, "but by then it might be too late for them to reposition." The maneuver began. Slowly, steadily, the lead steers were guided away from the main trail. The rest of the herd followed, though some needed more persuasion than others. Willa worked tirelessly, urging reluctant cattle forward, keeping stragglers from wandering off in the wrong direction. From the corner of her eye, she could see movement at the barrier. Hollister had realized their plan and was shouting orders to his men. Some were already mounting up, preparing to intercept the herd before it could reach the ridge. "They're coming." Willa called to Tucker, who was guiding a group of steers up the first part of the slope. He glanced back, saw the approaching riders, and made a swift decision. "Emmett, Calvin, keep the herd moving. The rest of you with me, we'll hold them off." Willa didn't hesitate. She urged her mare toward Tucker's position, drawing her rifle as she rode. 4 other drovers did the same, forming a line between the advancing Double Creek men and the vulnerable cattle. Hollister's men pulled up short when confronted with 6 armed riders. Blackwell moved to the front of their group, his face twisted with anger. "You're trespassing, Fallon," he shouted. "This is Double Creek land." "We're exercising our right of passage," Tucker called back calmly. "A right that's been established by custom and usage for decades." "Not anymore," Blackwell snarled. "Hollister says you pay or you turn back." Tucker's voice remained steady. "We're not looking for trouble, Blackwell, but we will defend ourselves and our cattle if necessary." The standoff continued as the herd slowly made its way up the slope behind them. Willa could hear Emmett and Calvin calling to the cattle, urging them upward, if they could just buy enough time. Suddenly, Blackwell drew his pistol. "Enough talk. Turn that herd around now," or his words were cut off by the crack of a rifle. One of Hollister's men cried out, clutching his arm. Willa turned to see Haskell, his rifle still raised, a thin trail of smoke rising from the barrel. "Next one won't just graze," Haskell called out. Chaos erupted. Hollister's men drew their weapons and gunfire exploded from both sides. Willa's mare reared in alarm, but she brought the horse under control and took aim at a rider charging toward them. She fired, and the man tumbled from his saddle. Tucker was beside her, his own rifle barking steadily. "Fall back," he shouted to his people. "Toward the herd, use the rocks for cover." They retreated in good order, firing as they went. 2 more of Hollister's men went down, though whether dead or wounded, Willa couldn't tell. One of their own drovers, Jenkins, was hit in the shoulder but managed to stay mounted as they withdrew. The rocky terrain worked to their advantage, providing natural barriers that Hollister's men had to navigate. By the time they reached the base of the slope, most of the herd had already crested the ridge under Emmett and Calvin's guidance. Tucker positioned his fighters among the rocks, creating a defensive line that Hollister's men would have to breach to reach the cattle. The shooting continued, sporadic now as both sides conserved ammunition. "They won't give up easily," Willa said, reloading her rifle beside Tucker. "No," he agreed grimly, "but neither will we." Hollister himself had finally joined his men, his face purple with rage as he surveyed the situation. The cattle were now mostly beyond his reach, moving along the ridge that would eventually bring them back to the trail several miles ahead, bypassing the barrier entirely. "Fallon," Hollister bellowed. "This isn't over. You'll never make it to Santa Fe with those cattle." Tucker didn't bother to respond, focusing instead on getting his people safely up the slope. Jenkins was helped onto his horse by Cooper, his wounded shoulder hastily bandaged. One by one, they began the ascent, continuing to provide covering fire for those still exposed. Willa was one of the last to start up the slope, her mare picking its way carefully among the loose rocks. She was halfway up when a shot rang out, closer than the others. Her hat flew from her head, and she felt the burn of a bullet grazing her temple. Momentarily stunned, she swayed in the saddle. Then strong hands were steadying her, and Tucker's voice cut through the haze of pain. "Willa, stay with me," she blinked, forcing herself to focus. "I'm all right," she managed. "Just grazed me." Blood trickled down the side of her face, but the wound was indeed superficial. Still, the near miss had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. Tucker's face was a mask of controlled fury as he helped guide her horse the rest of the way up the slope. Once they reached the relative safety of the ridge, he quickly examined her injury, his touch gentle despite the anger in his eyes. "It's not deep," he confirmed, using his bandana to wipe away the blood. "But a half-inch to the right." He didn't finish the sentence, didn't need to. They both knew how close the call had been. "I'm fine, Tucker," she assured him, reaching up to squeeze his hand. "Really?" He nodded, though the worry didn't leave his eyes. "Stay with Calvin at the chuck wagon for now. We need to keep moving before Hollister figures out a way to get ahead of us." Though she wanted to argue, Willa recognized the wisdom in his words. The wound, minor as it was, had left her lightheaded. She allowed Calvin to help her down from her horse and settled onto the wagon seat beside him as the drive continued along the ridge. By nightfall, they had rejoined the main trail well beyond Double Creek's barrier. Tucker called a halt in a defensible position, with clear lines of sight in all directions. The mood in camp was subdued as they tended to their wounded Jenkins with his shoulder, Willa with her grazed temple, and Cooper with a bullet burn along his ribs. "You think they'll try again tonight?" Emmett asked as they gathered around the small fire, keeping their voices low. Tucker shook his head. "Not tonight, but they'll regroup. Hollister won't let this go so easily." "We should reach the boundary of Double Creek land by noon tomorrow," Calvin pointed out. "Once we're past that, he'll have less excuse to come after us." "Less excuse, but no less motivation," Tucker replied grimly. "Hollister wants Diamond back, and he wants revenge for what happened with Blackwell. He won't stop until he gets both or is forced to." Willa, sitting beside Tucker with a fresh bandage on her temple, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "So what do we do?" Tucker looked at each of them in turn, his expression resolute. "We keep moving. We get these cattle to Santa Fe. And we watch each other's backs every step of the way." The night passed without incident, though no one slept deeply. Triple watches were maintained, and every unusual sound brought hands to weapons. By dawn, they were all exhausted but determined to press on. As predicted, they crossed the boundary of Double Creek land shortly after noon the following day. A collective sigh of relief went through the drovers, though Tucker maintained the same vigilant posture he'd held since the confrontation. "Don't let your guard down," he cautioned. "We're still 2 days from Santa Fe, and there's plenty of open country between here and there." His warning proved prescient. That afternoon, as they approached a water hole where they had planned to rest the cattle, a rider appeared on the horizon, pushing his horse hard toward their position. It was one of the hands Tucker had hired to stay behind at Diamondback. The man reined in sharply before Tucker, his horse lathered from the hard ride. "Mr. Fallon, thank God I found you. What's happened?" Tucker demanded, dread evident in his voice. "It's the ranch," the man gasped, still catching his breath. "Hollister's men attacked last night, set fire to the north pasture and the hay barn." Willa felt her heart drop. "Sarah, Thomas, they're safe," the man assured her quickly. "Hold up in the main house with the other hands." but Hollister sent a message. Said to tell you that next time it won't just be the hay barn. Tucker's face had gone pale beneath his tan. Anyone hurt? Bill took a bullet in the leg, but he'll live. Sarah patched him up good. Tucker turned to Emmett and Calvin, who had ridden up to hear the news. I'm going back. You two get these cattle to Santa Fe. I'm coming with you, Willa said immediately. Tucker started to protest, then saw the determination in her eyes and nodded. Haskell, Cooper, and Jenkins will go with Emmett and Calvin. The rest of you come with us. The decision made, they wasted no time. The herd was divided, with the strongest, healthiest cattle continuing on to Santa Fe under Emmett's leadership. Tucker, Willa, and 4 other men turned their horses back toward Diamondback, pushing them as hard as they dared given the distance they had to cover. They rode through the night, stopping only briefly to rest the horses. By dawn, they had passed through Double Creek territory again, this time staying well clear of the main ranch buildings. No one challenged them, which Tucker found more worrying than reassuring. They're focused on Diamondback, he said grimly during a brief stop to water the horses. Hollister knows exactly what he's doing. Divide our forces, then strike while we're weakened. Willa's temple throbbed where the bullet had grazed her, but she ignored the pain. We'll stop him, Tucker. He looked at her, admiration mixing with concern in his gaze. Yes, we will. But be careful, Willa. Hollister's proven he's willing to go to any lengths. By mid-afternoon, they reached the ridge overlooking Diamondback Valley. The sight that greeted them confirmed their worst fears. The hay barn was a blackened ruin, and large swaths of the north pasture were charred and smoking. The main house appeared intact, but even from a distance, they could see armed men positioned on the porch and around the property. Those aren't our people, Tucker said quietly. Hollister's taken the house. Cold fear gripped Willa's heart. Sarah and Thomas. Hollister won't harm them yet, Tucker said, though his voice lacked conviction. He needs them as leverage. They retreated from the ridge to avoid being spotted and made camp in a sheltered draw about a mile from the ranch. As darkness fell, Tucker outlined his plan. They won't be expecting us to move at night. We go in quiet, take out any sentries, and get to the house. Our priority is Sarah, Thomas, and any of our people being held. And then, one of the men asked. Tucker's expression hardened. And then we take back what's ours. Under cover of darkness, they approached the ranch from the west, where the trees grew closest to the buildings. Tucker sent 2 men to secure the stable and free their remaining horses, both to prevent Hollister's men from using them as an escape and to create a diversion if needed. Willa stayed with Tucker as they crept toward the main house. A single guard sat on the porch steps, rifle across his knees. Tucker signaled for her to wait while he circled behind. The guard never knew what hit him. One moment he was sitting, scanning the darkness. The next, Tucker's arm was around his throat, cutting off any cry for help. The man struggled briefly, then went limp. Tucker dragged him behind the bushes, binding and gagging him efficiently. Moving to the side of the house, they peered through a window into the main room. What Willa saw made her blood run cold. Sarah and Thomas were seated at the table, their faces drawn with fear. Across from them sat Hollister himself, casually eating what appeared to be Sarah's cooking. Blackwell stood by the fireplace, his injured jaw still visibly swollen even weeks after Tucker had broken it. 4 other men were visible in the room, all armed. Through the open door to the kitchen, Willa could see 2 of their ranch hands tied to chairs, Bill with his bandaged leg, and Miguel, the young Mexican hand who helped with the horses. Tucker withdrew from the window, his expression murderous. 8 men total, including Hollister and Blackwell. Too many to take head-on. The diversion, Willa suggested. Tucker nodded. We'll wait for it. When it comes, I'll go through the front. You take the back door, free Bill and Miguel if you can." Willa checked her pistol, making sure it was fully loaded. "Be careful." Tucker's eyes met hers in the darkness. "You too." They didn't have to wait long. A sudden commotion erupted from the direction of the stable, shouts, the frightened neighing of horses, and then a gunshot. Inside the house, they could hear Hollister barking orders. Two men rushed out the front door, heading toward the disturbance. That left 6 still bad odds, but better than before. Tucker gave the signal and they moved. He took the front, while Willa slipped around to the kitchen door. Through the window, she could see the room was momentarily empty, with Bill and Miguel still tied to their chairs. She eased the door open, wincing as it creaked slightly. Neither man made a sound as she entered, though their eyes widened in recognition. Willa pressed a finger to her lips as she moved to cut Bill's bonds first. "Blackwell's got a knife at the boy's throat," Bill whispered as soon as his gag was removed. "Hollister said he'd kill him if Fallon didn't show by morning." Cold fury washed through Willa as she freed Miguel. "Tucker's here now. We need to." A crash from the main room interrupted her. Tucker's voice, cold and commanding, carried clearly. "Let the boy go, Blackwell. This is between us." Willa gestured for Bill and Miguel to stay down, then moved to the doorway, pistol ready. She could see Tucker standing just inside the front entrance, his rifle trained on Blackwell, who indeed had a knife pressed against young Thomas's throat. Sarah was being restrained by one of Hollister's men, while Hollister himself stood behind his foreman, using both as shields. "Well, well," Hollister drawled, his face flushed with triumph. "The prodigal rancher returns, sooner than I expected, I'll admit." "Let them go," Tucker said evenly. "Your quarrel's with me, not with women and children." Hollister laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "My quarrel's with anyone who defies me, Fallon. You should have learned that by now." From her position, Willa could see one of Hollister's men moving stealthily to flank Tucker. Without hesitation, she stepped into the doorway and fired. The man dropped with a cry of pain, clutching his shoulder. Chaos erupted. Blackwell jerked in surprise at the shot, and Thomas seized the opportunity to sink his teeth into the foreman's hand. Blackwell howled, loosening his grip just enough for the boy to squirm free and run to his mother. Tucker fired at the man holding Sarah, hitting him in the leg. As he fell, Sarah grabbed Thomas and dropped to the floor out of the line of fire. Hollister lunged for his own pistol, but Miguel appeared from the kitchen and tackled him from behind. They crashed into the table, sending dishes flying. Blackwell, still recovering from Thomas's bite, reached for his gun. Willa took aim and fired, but at the same moment he moved. The bullet grazed his arm instead of hitting center mass as she'd intended. Blackwell turned toward her, hatred contorting his features. He raised his pistol, but before he could fire, Tucker's rifle cracked. Blackwell staggered, a look of surprise crossing his face as a crimson stain spread across his chest. He toppled forward, dead, before he hit the floor. Hollister had fought free of Miguel and now stood with his back to the fireplace, pistol drawn. "You've gone too far now, Fallon," he spat. "Killing my foreman. The law will hang you for this." "Self-defense," Tucker replied calmly, his rifle unwavering, "as any witness here will attest." He was about to shoot Miss Turner. Hollister's eyes darted around the room, taking in his fallen men and the grim faces of Tucker's people now entering from both doors. Defeat was written in every line of his body, but the hatred in his eyes remained undimmed. "You haven't won," he said bitterly. "Even if you kill me, my sons will come for you. Double Creek will never forget this." "I'm not going to kill you, Hollister," Tucker said, surprising everyone. "I'm going to let you leave alive, right now, with a message for your sons and anyone else who thinks of coming against Diamondback." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "The message is this: we defend our own. Today I'm showing mercy. Next time I won't. Spread the word that Diamondback land and Diamondback people are not to be trifled with." For a long moment, Hollister stood frozen, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Then, slowly, he lowered his pistol. "This isn't over, Fallon." "Yes," Tucker said firmly. "It is, unless you want to lose more than just your foreman." Hollister's eyes flickered to Blackwell's body, then back to Tucker. Without another word, he holstered his weapon and walked to the door. Tucker's men parted to let him pass. At the threshold, Hollister paused. "You'll regret this day," he said over his shoulder. "The only thing I regret," Tucker replied, "is not breaking Blackwell's jaw sooner." After Hollister departed, taking his wounded men with him, the atmosphere in the house transformed. Sarah rushed to embrace Tucker, thanking him through tears of relief. Thomas clung to his mother, his young face still pale from the ordeal but brightening by the minute. Willa moved to Tucker's side, her hand finding his. He squeezed it tightly, drawing her closer. "Is it really over?" she asked softly. Tucker looked down at her, his expression weary but determined. "With Hollister, I think so. Men like him understand one-language power. Today he learned that Diamondback isn't the easy target he thought. And Blackwell." She glanced at the body, feeling no remorse for the man who had tried to force himself on her and had held a knife to a child's throat. "Justice," Tucker said simply. Then, to the others, "We need to secure the ranch. Hollister might be gone, but I want watches posted until Emmett and Calvin return with the others." The next few hours were spent treating wounds, repairing what damage they could, and ensuring the ranch was protected. By dawn, a semblance of normalcy had returned to Diamondback. The charred hay barn and north pasture were painful reminders of how close they had come to losing everything. But the main house and most of the property remained intact. Tucker found Willa sitting on the porch as the sun rose, casting golden light across the valley. He lowered himself beside her with a weary sigh. "You should rest," she said, noting the exhaustion etched in his features. "You haven't slept in 2 days." "Neither have you," he pointed out, brushing a gentle finger along the bandage at her temple. "How's the head?" "It'll heal," she said with a small smile. "Everything will." Tucker nodded, his gaze moving over the ranch's ranch, built with years of sweat and determination. "Yes, it will." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the ranch slowly came to life around them. Then Tucker turned to her, taking both her hands in his. "Last night, when I saw Blackwell pointing his gun at you, I realized something," he said, his voice low and intense. "Life out here is uncertain at the best of times. We never know what tomorrow might bring." Willa nodded, her heart quickening at his tone. "I told you before we left that I wanted to do things properly when we returned," Tucker continued. "Well, we're back now, and I don't want to wait any longer." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small, worn velvet box. "This was my mother's. I've kept it all these years, waiting for the right person." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring with a small diamond. "Willa Turner, I love you. I loved you from the moment you stood your ground against Blackwell, refusing to be cowed by his threats. Will you marry me? Be my partner in this ranch and in life." Tears welled in Willa's eyes as she looked from the ring to Tucker's face. In his eyes she saw everything she'd ever wanted: respect, admiration, and love so deep it took her breath away. "Yes," she whispered, and then louder. "Yes, Tucker Fallon. I will marry you." His smile transformed his face, erasing the weariness and worry of the past days. He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, as if it had always been meant for her, and then drew her into his arms. Their kiss was tender yet passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. When they finally parted, both were smiling despite the tears in their eyes. "When?" Tucker asked, his forehead resting against hers. "As soon as possible," Willa replied. "Life is too uncertain to waste a single day." Tucker nodded in agreement. "When Emmett and Calvin return, then, we'll have the minister come from Fort Stanton." They sealed the decision with another kiss, heedless of the ranch hands who had emerged from the bunkhouse and were now grinning at the sight of their normally reserved boss displaying such open affection. True to their word, Tucker and Willa were married just 2 weeks later, after Emmett and Calvin returned with the proceeds from the successful cattle sale in Santa Fe. The ceremony was held in the newly repaired yard of Diamondback Ranch, with Sarah providing a feast that would be talked about for years to come. Willa wore a simple white dress that Sarah had helped her make, with wildflowers woven into her dark hair. Tucker looked almost unfamiliar in his best suit, his tall frame somehow more imposing when formally dressed. But his eyes, when they fixed on Willa walking toward him, held the same steady warmth that had first drawn her to him. The celebration lasted well into the night, with neighbors from miles around joining in despite the recent troubles. Even old Sam Lightfoot came, bringing a gift of beautifully tanned deerskin gloves for both bride and groom. As the festivities wound down, Tucker led Willa to the main house, now their house. He had insisted on carrying her over the threshold, an old tradition his mother had told him about, and one that made Willa laugh with surprise and delight. "Welcome home, Mrs. Fallon," he said, setting her gently on her feet in the main room, which had been transformed from the site of violence to a warm, inviting space with fresh flowers and new curtains Sarah had helped sew. "It still doesn't seem real," Willa admitted, looking up at her husband. With wonder. "A few months ago, I was just trying to survive one day at a time." Tucker drew her into his arms. "And now," she smiled, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain, "now I'm looking forward to every day, knowing I'll spend it with you." Their kiss deepened, no longer constrained by propriety or circumstances. They had waited, honoring the traditions they both respected. But now, as husband and wife, there was no need to hold back the passion that had simmered between them from the beginning. Tucker lifted her into his arms again, carrying her to the bedroom that was now theirs to share. The night that followed was everything Willa had ever dreamed of, tender yet passionate, with Tucker treating her as precious but never fragile. In his arms, she found a home more secure than any physical dwelling. In his eyes, she saw a future brighter than any she could have imagined for herself when she'd stood trembling in Silas Blackwell's office all those months ago. Epilogue: 5 years later, the summer sun beat down on Diamondback Ranch as Willa wiped her brow, watching her 3-year-old son, James, toddle after Tucker across the yard. The boy's delighted laughter carried on the warm breeze as his father swung him up onto his shoulders. "Careful with your brother," Willa called as her 5-year-old daughter, Rebecca, ran to join them. "He's not as steady as you are yet." Rebecca, with her father's auburn highlights in her dark hair, nodded solemnly. "I'll help watch him, Mama." Tucker grinned, settling James more securely on his shoulders. "Your mama worries too much, doesn't she, little man?" James giggled in agreement, his small hands gripping Tucker's hat for balance. Willa shook her head, unable to suppress her own smile. "Someone in this family has to worry. The rest of you would ride off cliffs if I didn't keep an eye out." In the 5 years since their wedding, Diamondback had prospered beyond their wildest hopes. The confrontation with Hollister had indeed proved to be the end of that particular trouble. The older man had died just a year later of apoplexy, it was said, and his sons had shown no interest in continuing their father's feud. Double Creek and Diamondback maintained a cool but peaceful coexistence, with neither encroaching on the other's territory. Emmett and Calvin had remained loyal hands, with Emmett now serving as foreman. Sarah still ruled the kitchen, though Willa had gradually taken over more of the household responsibilities as she settled into her role as mistress of Diamondback. And then there were the children. Rebecca had arrived just over a year after their wedding, a strong, healthy girl with her mother's determination and her father's steady gaze. James had followed 2 years later, a quieter child but with a mischievous streak that kept them all on their toes. Now a third child was on the way, though only Tucker knew so far. Willa had confirmed her suspicions just that morning and was waiting for the right moment to share the news. As she watched her family in the yard, Tucker now giving both children rides on his shoulders in turn, their laughter blending with his deeper chuckle, Willa felt a contentment so profound it brought tears to her eyes. From the desperate young woman facing Silas Blackwell's unwanted advances to the confident ranch mistress she had become, the journey had been remarkable. Yet through it all, one constant remained the steady love and respect of Tucker Fallon, the man who had broken a foreman's jaw to defend a woman he didn't know, and then offered her not just a job, but eventually his heart and his name. Tucker looked up, catching her watching them. His smile softened and he set the children down gently. "Go help your Aunt Sarah with the cookies," he told them, and they raced off toward the house, always eager for Sarah's baking. Tucker crossed to where Willa stood, his eyes taking in her flushed face with concern. "You all right?" "It's hot out here." "I'm perfect," she said, reaching for his hand. "And I have something to tell you." His eyebrows rose questioningly. "Come spring, Diamondback will have a new resident," Willa said, placing their joined hands over her still flat abdomen. Tucker's eyes widened, then crinkled with joy as he understood. "You're sure?" Willa nodded, laughing as he suddenly lifted her off her feet, spinning her in a circle before setting her down with exaggerated care. "Careful with your wife, Mr. Fallon," she teased. "She's in a delicate condition." Tucker's arms encircled her waist, pulling her close. "You've never been delicate a day in your life, Mrs. Fallon, and that's one of the many reasons I love you." As his lips met hers, Willa reflected on the strange turns life could take. How a moment of danger and desperation had led her to the greatest happiness she had ever known. How a man's simple act of decency had changed everything. The foreman had demanded favors for her wages, and a cowboy had broken his jaw and said, "Work for me." And in doing so, Tucker Fallon had given Willa Turner far more than just employment. He had given her a home, a family, and a love that would last a lifetime.